In breaking news that's just come in the last 20 minutes or half an hour or so, critical US Supreme Court ruling which grants a partial ban on birthright citizenship. The latest Supreme Court ruling is, remember, not a decision on whether Trump has the authority to end birthright citizenship. It made no mention of that or ruled on that. Rather, it's instead a ruling about how lower courts have whether lower courts have that power to stop Trump from implementing his ban on birthright citizenship across the United States. Now, the Supreme Court has said that, issued that ruling that limits really those powers, that injunction power. Now, just for some background here, three lower courts stopped Trump's plans with a nationwide injunction. The Trump administration then went to the Supreme Court saying that lower courts can't issue blanket nationwide bans. Now, birthright citizenship means that every child born in the United States automatically becomes a US citizen, irrespective of the parent's nationality. Trump, of course, wanting to end birthright citizenship and putting in an executive order on that front. Let's try and get more on the story, try and understand what exactly the Supreme Court has said. For more on this breaking story, I'm joined by Hiba Anwar. She's an attorney at Erickson Immigration Group in Arlington, Virginia. Hiba, thank you so much for joining us here on NDTV. If you could tell us exactly what does the Supreme Court say about injunctions?
So essentially, the Supreme Court held that a federal judge's ability to issue a nationwide injunction was no longer as expansive as it has been in the past. In other words, basically, the Supreme Court narrowed the scope of nationwide injunctions that are imposed by judges so that the injunctions now only apply to an individual or a group or a state that sues. So in other words, if you apply this ruling to the executive order on birthright citizenship, it basically means that the birthright citizenship executive order can move forward in states, even if the state has challenged it to a certain extent, depending on whether or not an individual or a group sues.
So just for a hypothetical understanding of this, if there was an Indian couple that sued against Trump's order, then they would essentially be protected. These are Indian couples who would be here on a temporary work permit, for example, but that would not necessarily apply to everyone else who are not part of that lawsuit. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And I think the operative words here are if the couple chooses to sue and if they're ultimately successful. What the concern as a result of this ruling is that this is now going to create a situation where individual couples or individuals or groups have to engage in individualized litigation, as opposed to the ability of a federal judge issuing a nationwide universal injunction and stopping something that the judge feels is unconstitutional through one limited action. So I think the best illustration of that would be if you think about an H-1B visa holder in the US who happens to be pregnant. If the pregnant H-1B visa holder wants to challenge the birthright citizenship executive order, she would actually have to sue individually or join a class action.
But Hiba, wouldn't that create a lot of confusion across the United States with all these individual cases, either individually or class action?
That's definitely one of the concerns. The scenario that is potentially created now is significant logistical administrative burden, as well as, quite honestly, additional bureaucratic burden on the part of the government, because now the government has to go through additional steps in order to verify, the citizenship of the child that's born in the United States. If there's going to be a set of parents who are claiming birthright citizenship for their child, there's going to be additional documentation or information that now needs to be provided, but also subsequently verified. So there is definitely potential for quite a bit more burdensome administrative, but also bureaucratic burden.
Right. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here and sifting through these details that have just come in, giving us clarity on that as well. Now, let's get across to Raymond Victory. He's represents the Democratic side of things. Raymond, you've heard what's come in from the Supreme Court. Your immediate reactions to what you've heard?
Well, thanks very much for having me. My immediate reaction is that this is of a piece of President Trump's attempt to change the constitutional method of government in the United States. We've had a system of checks and balances for almost 250 years, and that is that the executive is not supreme, but is constrained by the judicial branch and the legislative branch. President Trump obviously wants to change that. He wants to make it more of an authoritarian approach to government. So one of the ways in which you do that is to attack the courts. You attack the courts on decisions that you want to try to weaken their powers. The 14th Amendment, which requires birthright citizenship, is plain in the United States Constitution. The Supreme Court did not have the chutzpah, if you will, gumption, to try to attack that directly. So what they've done is to try to attack it indirectly and to weaken the power of the courts through this decision. It is of a piece of what the majority conservatives are willing to do, and that is to try to placate Trump and his administration around the edges procedurally while not taking on the obvious
Right.
substantive question.
Raymond, thank you for your reactions there. We also would like to get some sort of reaction coming in from the Republican side of things. We have Puneet Ahluwalia joining us now. He represents the Republican Party. He's a Republican strategist. Puneet, clearly the Democrats are unhappy about this, seeing this as a big blow. And surely you see this as a huge step forward for Trump, especially with those numerous injunctions that have come, not just on birthright citizenship, but in other things as well. For example, Trump's immigration crackdown.
Well, I'm glad President Trump has this victory. It's needed because what he's trying to do is really bring the rule of law, especially when it comes to immigration, which is one of the biggest mandates he got from the American voters, is to set that right. So he's trying to fix the issue, which has been done, should have been done by former presidents and the Congress, which they failed to do. Hence the reason we have a chaos in immigration in our country. But I'm glad President Trump and the Supreme Court sees it that way, and of course has kind of curtailed the power of the smaller courts. I think the Democrats tend to use the Constitution to their advantage. When it comes to Second Amendment, they're against it. When it comes to finding a path of rule of law and legal immigration in this nation, which is through the pathway and not creating a chaos which has been created by the Biden and the Obama administration earlier, which has led us to this stage where President Trump is realigning the immigration process in our nation. So I believe that it's the right move. It's important for us to fix our immigration. At the same time, send the criminals, most importantly, what he's also trying to achieve is send the criminals back to the countries from where they've come from. If we can't send them back to those countries, we can send them somewhere else. But get the bad element out of our communities, out of our businesses, out of our families, and make America safe again.
Right, Puneet. Puneet, thank you very much for your time. Running out of time here on Washington Watch. The story is not going to go away anytime soon. Huge implications with that ruling coming in from the Supreme Court, and we'll continue to keep tabs on that.